following is a non-profit reading taken from White Dwarf, issue 130.
You know what you must do, Borshak? Inquisitor Kryptman asked sternly. The psyker nodded shakily. I must read this alien artifact and tell you what I find. Kryptman nodded. He mistrusted Borshak. Like all empaths, the psyker was highly strung, but there was more to it than that. There was a weakness about the skinny youth that made Kryptman suspect Borshak might be receptive to malign influences. He resolved to watch him closely. They made their way down the cold stone corridor of the Tassala Prime base. The two black-robed security novices saluted Kryptman at the door. He answered their salute by punching his fist against his chest.
"Password?"
asked one of the novices. Ordinarily, Kryptman would have been unfazed by the need to give the code words. Even here, in one of the most heavily guarded citadels of the Inquisition, he could understand the need for vigilance. However, he was nervous about the alien artifact and the circumstances it had been discovered in. Coupled with the reports of sector-wide unrest, it had set his nerves on edge. He wondered if the appearance of this strange creature was the harbinger of some new threat to the security of the Imperium.
"Opus Dei,"
he said testily. The cold-eyed novices stepped aside. Kryptman raised his ring and pointed at the door seal.
"No barrier stands in the way of the truly faithful,"
he said. A red jewel set on his ring pulsed. The runes on the door flared to life, and the door dissolved. Kryptman gestured for Borshak to proceed, then followed him into the secure area. He knew then that they were safe in isolation. The secret of the dissolving doors was one of the Inquisition's most carefully guarded secrets, and he was one of the few men privy to it. The artifact sat on a plinth in the center of the room, the eerie blue aura of the stasis field glowing about it. They moved across to the center and looked down at it. It looks alive," muttered Borshak. He clawed at his shaven head with one dirty nail-bitten hand. I don't like it."
"It doesn't matter whether you like it,"
said Kryptman. He understood Borshak's unease. The fleshy, pulpy appearance of the thing set his stomach turning. During his own novitiate, he had studied torture techniques. The appearance of the thing reminded him far too much of an arm from which the flesh had been flayed to reveal muscle.
"Just read it."
You say this was taken from the wreckage of the freighter Hammer of Foes?" Borshak asked.
"Yes. It was stored in stasis."
This was more like it. The psyker had begun to collect information in order to facilitate his reading. "And there was no crewmen on board?"
"No living crewmen. Many of the escape pods were fired. They have yet to be found. About 3 of the crew still have to be accounted for. We found the bodies of the others. They had been killed with something that appeared to be organic material, eaten right through as if by a combination of acid and giant worms. The ship had been decompressed. We found the body of its astropath floating near the stasis chamber. He had died of oxygen starvation. The artifact was in the chamber."
Borshak took a deep breath. His lined face looked even more worried and careworn than usual. He peeled off his gloves. I'm ready," he said. Kryptman intoned the litany. The stasis field deactivated. For a long, tense moment, they waited. At first, nothing seemed to happen, and they relaxed slightly. Kryptman checked the readings on the brass-rimmed screen of his wall monitor. The tech priests had been correct. No biological contamination. So far, so good. He became aware that Borshak was looking at him. He nodded. The psyker proceeded. A grimace of distaste passed over his face as he touched the mucus-coated thing. He pulled his hand back. A thin film of slime glistened on his skin. "Ugh," he said. "Get on with it." With a slight shudder, he grasped the thing once more. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, settling down into the trance state needed for psychic receptivity. A faint nimbus of light played around the eye symbol tattooed on his forehead. When he spoke, his voice seemed deeper and more confident. "It is alive," he said, calmly. "Sentient?" asked Kryptman. Barely. I'm receiving conflicting impressions of the thing. I've just barely made contact. It's so alien. It's like trying to read the mind of a spider." "Try for a deeper reading." Borshak nodded. His breathing slowed. If Kryptman had not known better, he would have thought Borshak was asleep. He noticed a small tick had appeared far back in the psyker's jaw. "It's alive, and part of it hates. It's so fierce. No, one of them is so fierce. It lives to bite and chew and spit. It chews up the other part, the little part, and makes it into shrapnel. There's 3 of them. One bites, one guides, and one dies." "One dies?" "Yes, one lives to die. It's odd. The small one is many. It lives to die. It is chewed up and turned into projectiles and infects the target." "Speak sense, man." Borshak had started to sweat. The strain of contact with the alien thing was starting to tell. "It's a weapon, and it's alive. The bullets are alive. The firing mechanism is alive, and the gun's alive. It's a kind of symbiotic organism, like the Martian tree crab. It's alive, and it hates you. Us." Kryptman's mind reeled. A living weapon, a living rifle. He tried to think of how such a creature might evolve. It was madness. Weapons were designed, not born. "Try psychometry. Find out what happened on the hammer." "We are picked up by the sensitive ones, the ones who speak at distance. He senses our hate and he responds. At first he is curious, then he grows to know and love us. He is united with us. He senses our blood love, and we hunt. We hunt the meat things, the enemies of our makers. He knows our need to plant our seed within them. He knows we hunger to spurt forth the little hungry ones who eat the meat. He carries us, and we seek our prey through the long dark red of the long corridors." Kryptman noticed how agitated Borshak had become. The gun had started to throb in his hand, the fleshy muscular sacs pulsing like the valves of a great exposed heart. He sensed that something was wrong. "Put the thing down, man. It's doing something to your mind." "We hunted the meat things to lay the young eggs within their flesh. Again and again we send them forth, pleasure bursting through us, mixed with the pain as we send the little eaters on our way. Fire them out to bore through the meat." Borshak swiveled the huge gun to bear on him. Kryptman threw himself to one side. The thing in Borshak's hands spasmed. There was a terrible grinding, tearing sound. Kryptman remembered what Borshak had said about the grubs being chewed up and spat out. There was a sound like a man vomiting. A burst of mucus sprayed out. Something hard cracked into the wall behind him. A stink, as if of excrement mixed with bile, filled the air. Yes, we hunt the meat things, but they flee into the great dark and they trap the ship. Soon it is hard to breathe. But the meat thing, our carrier, our partner, places us in stasis so we might live. Now we have a new partner, group mind complete. Kryptman rolled, drawing his pistol. The grinding sound continued. A burst of shrapnel tore into the wall. Steam rose from the stone where the acid mucus eroded rock. Kryptman leapt up and blasted. The bolt flew straight and true into Borshak's chest. His ribcage exploded. What was revealed within reminded Kryptman oddly of the weapon, falling from the Psyker's dead hands. He fought to control the urge to pump bolter shells into it. It lay there dormant. Borshak's mouth continued to open like a fish when out of water. The Inquisitor understood now what had happened on the hammer. The ship's astropath had melded with the weapon and hunted the unarmed crew. They had fled in the escape pods after decompressing the ship. Rather than let the weapon die, the astropath had put it into stasis and suffocated himself. That question answered, Kryptman could hand the artifact over to the tech priests for dissection. There were still other questions that needed answers, though. Who had made the gun? Where had it come from? Were there any more? Kryptman had a premonition that he and the whole Imperium would soon need to know the answers.